Hi. Thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you for staying for the second talk if you came for the first one and were not familiar with Andro Eradze's practice and are taking this opportunity to get to know it. Um, we're really thrilled to present Andro Eradze's first museum solo exhibition here in Berkeley. And I'm Margot Norton. For those who don't know me, I'm the chief curator here at Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. I am really just thrilled that Andro could join us from Tbilisi, Georgia, to speak more about his work today. I'm just going to start with a brief introduction, and then Andro will present on his work, followed by a brief conversation between the two of us, and then leave some time for questions from the audience. So for those of you who have questions that arise, please take note of them and ask them at the end. Um, I wanted to start by just saying that I first met Andro in Tbilisi back in 2018. I was invited there to speak at an art fair, actually, but I was also working on an exhibition with an artist based in Georgia named Anna K.E. We were working on the Georgian Pavilion for the Venice Biennial, which would take place the following year in 2019. And from the moment that I first saw Andro's work, I was immediately captivated, and came back to do a studio visit a couple years later, which resulted in a project that we did together at the New Museum in New York, where I was a curator before coming here, which was part of this screen series program that the New Museum did. And it was, I think, just a really incredible opportunity to showcase the work of an artist whose work I felt was just incredibly mature, work that was, at once mesmerizing, but also really it captivated me in a way that I was not used to seeing. They're works that you want to spend time with. They slow you down. They encourage deeper looking, and there's just so many layers to them. Every time I watch them, I discover something new. And later on, we were talking to each other, and he told me that his newest film, Flowering and Fading, was completing a trilogy of films, including one that we showed at New Museum back in 2020, another that was commissioned for the 2022 Venice Biennial. And then this was the third one in a series of three films that, he didn't necessarily realize were be a trilogy, but that were coming together to form one. And it just felt like the right time to bring these three works together for a solo exhibition. And we're showing them in the gallery just outside the theater on the left. And they're showing in sequence. The entirety of the three films takes about 37 minutes. And I think it's a really powerful experience to see all three of them in sequence and to see the resonances between them and the way that they build upon one another, which we'll speak about in our conversation this evening. And tonight, we'll, just have Andro present on his practice, and then at about 15-20 minutes, we'll engage in a conversation. But I wanted to mention a quick note that Andro's presentation, there's some images that flicker. So if anyone has a light sensitivity, I would just say those images will be right at the beginning of the presentation. So you can leave if you need to and come back in about 5 minutes, and then they'll be over. And with that, allow me to give a warm welcome to Andro Eradze.
I'm so happy to be here, and thank you, Margot, for your very nice and warm introduction. I'm honored to be here because I've been knowing about this place for so long, and I would never imagine that I would stand here. But things happen, and I'm pretty happy that this is happening, and I'm happy to share some of my works with you. But before we jump to that, I want to say few words because like since we're here at the film archive, um, I don't know if you know the situation in Georgia, the country that I come from, and I really want to express my solidarity to my colleagues, like filmmakers and artists who are like standing in the streets of Tbilisi for nearly around like 300 days now, and protesting the uh, government's path to kind of authoritarian regime. And many of my colleagues are imprisoned or they're going to the court trial. And I want to express my solidarity to these people who resist the, the regime on their everyday basis, which really like requires um, somehow strength and energy and effort from their side. And I believe that this act of the protest will lead to the better changes for Georgia. Thank you. Um, yeah, it was. I had to say, like, yeah, I just had this feeling that I had to start with this because otherwise, yeah, I would. It would. It would not be fair to my colleagues because it's so important. They're going through such a hard time there, so yeah, it's just important to give them the shout out. Yeah, to come back to my practice, I'm gonna give you a brief context of what I do. To like for you to have a much more better understanding of my context. My practice is, I work between experimental film, video, photography, and installation. I would say that these mediums often they blur into one each other. And they are, for me, they end up as a singular piece rather than something that can easily be separated from one another. I often describe my practice existing in a state of in betweenness, and I'm trying to somehow achieve or activate this moment of blurred boundaries between the social construct, urban landscape, and animality itself. I would say that I'm interested in the state of in betweenness and liminality and the ideas of changeability. In other words, in a state of becoming. In my works, like spaces and bodies, they appear to act as real, but at the same time, they can be seen or taken as non-spaces, non-bodies, or disabled bodies and spaces that bring up or fuel this imaginative aspect of my work, which I find significantly important in my practice. My works most of the times they address the notions like civilization, wilderness, otherness, and I would say that like fragile relations between human and non-human worlds in a way, collapses or connections, but through the prism of uncanny and sometimes shaped with a strange or mythical or even mystical tonality. In many of my works, non-human characters they take a lead, and through kind of animistic and magical realistic approach, I explore how objects, plants, taxidermy, or real animals and spaces take more metaphorical weight in a way and occupying, I would say, like central roles in the camera's gaze. I'm looking for constructing the moving images that are capable of bringing tension between human and non-human worlds again, but at the same time are never fixed or carrying specific descriptive kind of aspect, and I find this part of my work very important, that I keep it open for the new meanings that emerge, um, because sometimes these meanings emerge after the work is done. And just to speak about my process, it shifts like between the studio and like outdoor practice. Sometimes I record footage without the clear intention of what I have to do, in the sense that I will revisit this archival material later and will use them as works. And sometimes I work with the clear plan with the larger teams on a film set. So it's never one or another, it's somewhere in between. Just to put it briefly, um, sometimes I have a very clear idea of what I do, but sometimes I do not have any idea of how should the work would emerge in a way. And before we jump to the fl- the flickering piece, I want to note that somehow the stray dogs have been formed as central passengers in my video and film works, and I'm really interested of this idea of them once being domestic and somehow being abandoned by the owners, and and how they reclaim the urban landscape as their new wild environment. And I see these dogs as figures that embody the states of transitionality, and the transformation in a way. So so this is the work that contains the flickering. So if you are light sensitive, you can leave the room, and yeah, then you can re-enter back. Just before we start the the film. This work was made during the pandemic in 2021, when the streets were like empty and dogs took over the city, like the architecture of the city, because normally they're blended or merged into the everyday, the rhythm of the life, and you cannot really see them. And here they like took over, as I mentioned before, they kind of reclaimed this urban landscape, and they've added this post-apocalyptic or even post-human atmosphere to the architecture. And for me, work is capturing this moment of tension that they're about to accept me in their pack. I would say like into the new reality, like new now of that moment in a way. And also for me, the work acts as a meditative piece, because it has this tonality of the repetition of the same kind of motif in a way. So yeah, we can see the film, and then we can continue with the other notes of my practice. the idea of the night vision runs throughout my practice. You're gonna see in the other slides as well. And originally, as you know, night vision was invented for the military reasons. But the technique that then was adapted for the camera trapping, where a device is activated by the motion sensors. So these technologies are not kind of a replicating animal side, but they are an attempt to extend human perception in a way towards the sensitivity of the nocturnal animal's eyesight. So for me, this speaks to how humans kind of mimic and are inspired by, like non-human species in a way. And in my works, night vision is never unfolded as a real technique. It becomes an imitation of the mimicry in a way, a suggestion of, like non-human perception, a reminder that, kind of another way of seeing exists just beyond our own in a way. And also, I think carefully about positioning my work in a site-specific way. I think about the scale, the kind of the installative aspect of the work, and how they are shown within the light in the room, etc. So you can see a few examples of that. And I believe that it's an important aspect that through the way you show the work, it is activated in a different way. So some of the works need to be adjusted in a site-specific way, and some of them, they don't require much interaction. And especially this piece had a few adaptations or the variations that I made with it. So yeah, it's just like to give you the example, it's really important for me to work on a site and to think how to display these works. Okay, and this piece is actually, it acts as an actual opposite to the night vision limited access, the piece that we've just seen, because here I try to explore the notion of power dynamics, the moment of intrusion, moment like the edge of the collapse. So I have researched these rural urban landscapes in Georgia where dogs as packs live with their internal choreographies. And as you know, they're territorial animals and they defend the space they belong to in a way. So by attaching a camera to a car, I've entered their spaces for a few seconds, recording in a slow motion. This moment of when the alertness shifts into the defense somehow. And the video is 5 minutes, so we can see like 2 minutes, the beginning part, and then we can go on because, yeah, we're limited in time. Okay, I think it's enough. I mean, you get the idea of, because it's looping and it's kind of also here is the repetition, and I always use the, not always, but I like this idea of loop, of uh, constructing the moving image in the way that it repeats itself, so it becomes hypnotizing in uncanny way. And here is the installation that was kind of echoing or mirroring the tension in the video. The lighting in the room was adjusted to match the color tonality that you have in the video, emphasizing the sense that of like this, like stray dogs occupying the space back, because these are the stray dogs and they belong to the, like the external, like kind of the urban landscape, and I thought it was important to bring them back to the architectural space. So the visitors could enter through the narrow doorway or could view the work through the window. You can see it here. Or they could enter the room. So these gestures for me were like highlighting the ideas of domesticity, kind of intrusion, and belonging in a way. Speaking about the installation, my practice is also expanding beyond the moving image into photography and installation. I construct this metal frames and structures that hold images, also forming kind of physical barriers in a space. And these structures can resemble, I would say, gardens, cages, cemeteries, or marked territories. And they act, for me, they act as defense mechanisms, uh, guiding the audience movement and choreography in a space, and like being non-functional in the gallery context. In a way, these structures could become practical if removed from the artistic context. They could be activated in the like more practical way, so they could actually become actual defense mechanisms. But I'm interested in this idea of them being frozen in suspense, and I see them as a tamed mechanism that carry the potentiality to be activated elsewhere, but somehow remain trapped within a space. Yeah, and here are some variations of these fences that I always use, and some of the variations in kind of a the ways I think of them in a space, because they come as site specific works. Yeah, and I also do photography, and when it comes to my photographic work, I mostly adjust the color tonality to mimic, as I mentioned before, to mimic the night vision, as well as day for night techniques, which is a famous film technique where the footage is shot during the daylight and then is transformed into something resembling night. So I'm not aiming to depict reality. I am aiming to fabricate the reality by working with the actual objects and spaces. And I think of these images in relation of black and white photography, which to me always carried this quality of in-betweenness, like conditionality in a way. And yeah, because they are caught between telling the truth and at the same time um, constructing fiction. In other words, retelling the story. Yeah, and I see my adjusted tonalities kind of intentionally opening the same, I would say, same window of suspense that act as fabricated images, as a reminder that the photography could be a record and a construction at the same time. And also in my photographic works, I often use the frame images in metal that are like half open. And many of these images, they depict taxidermy animals. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm interested in depicting like states of non-being, like non-spaces, non-bodies that are trapped in a physical form. But at a times, I'm not even sure that we can define these as animals. I see them. I would say like I more see them as outcomes of human imagination, because people who make taxidermies, in trying to prove their mastery, sometimes they push the physical capability of the animals, and as a result, we kind of end up with a hyperreal body that was once belonged to a living organism, but has been since transformed into entirely something else. Yeah, so I'm interested in this condition of suspense, where what remains as a leftover of the real, and how this translation of what has been, left, shapes our knowledge. So to sum up, like the tension between mastery, imagination, domination, remains kind of a central aspect of how I approach or look at these images. That's it. For now. Thank you. I will move to.
It's yeah, it's awesome to hear about these works in conjunction with the works that we're showing, because we're not showing them, but of course they all interrelate so much. And especially like thinking about the images of your photographic practice in conversation with the films that you're making. And I love that you started with the images of those stray dogs in Tbilisi. It's so interesting. I feel like every city you go, there's like just a difference between the animals that are that are there. In Tbilisi, they're these giant dogs that are so gentle, and they kind of, they're in charge though. They're really special. And I actually wanted to start even by what you were describing right in the beginning about being on this stage and how you heard about this place before. And I think, one of the synergies that I found when I first came here too was that we have this great history of showing Georgian cinema in this theater, thanks to our director of film and senior curator Susan Oxaby, and all the research that you've done in Georgian film. But also, I know your practice kind of traverses both the film world and the museum or gallery world. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you see your work in relationship to Georgian cinema, or are there certain filmmakers that you are thinking about? I know when we even went to my office, you saw a Pichapong Versicle poster, and you were like, "That's the somebody who's been inspiring me." And also, even what it means to you, like in your translation of your work to show in a cinema like this versus in a gallery.
Is it on? Yeah. 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 Actually, that's a very interesting question, because, as you mentioned, my practice is, and as I mentioned earlier, it's like somewhere in between a film and like filmmaking, like experimental filmmaking and cinema. But I don't really differentiate these two. But somehow they're qualities that make this, strict line between what is cinema and what you define as a film, like experimental filmmaking. And in Georgia, we have a big tradition of conventional filmmaking, which is and was always like a huge inspiration for me. But at the same time, I studied at the Film Academy in Tbilisi, and I didn't finish the academy because I had this feeling that I couldn't fit there because of my kind of I was young, but I had this feeling that my vision was more artistic. It didn't really require for me to think about like storyline and like all that like classical approaches that the filmmakers go through. And somehow I've been distanced from the film scene, but at the same time I'm always fascinated by the rhythm and dynamics of the Georgian cinema. And while speaking about like Georgian filmmakers and experimental filmmaking in Georgia, which we have a very as a few legacy, I would say like if you ever have a chance to somehow screen the films of Alexander Sasha Rekviashvili, who used to be a visionary, and he's well known into the film circles, but he's not celebrated internationally. So, and also this filmmaker who was very young when he passed away, Sosoch Kaidze, he made a few short experimental films. They're fascinating. And also Misha Kobahidze, that only was focusing on short films. So while speaking about like that legacy, I think I feel that I somehow continue that path in a way, but not in the direct way, but just in a way that I feel that I'm more into like artistic / filmmaking way of my practice. If that answers your question.
Totally. They're also like such paintings in a way, especially this first piece that we have an image of here, All Hands Buried the Dead. I was noting the other day when watching this that it's funny, like nothing really happens in this film, like in terms of like a narrative or like a storyline, but yet there's so much that's contained within it. And all of these forces that are unseen are the protagonists of the film. So it's almost about like what is not visible that becomes the main character. I wanted to ask you a little bit about these shifts that take place in this piece, because I was watching it with my colleague the other day, and there's this moment in this film where there's like the wind is picking up and it feels like, just a very intense wind, no big deal. And then all of a sudden it starts to move in ways that appear unnatural. And then, certain things happen in the film, like the trees that at the very end of it that are enveloping you until they're nearly like, swallowing the frame. Often this piece and others are talked about in the context of magic realism and surrealism and how that takes hold in all of the works. But my question is really about that moment, that pinpoint moment when something that is appearing completely natural becomes unnatural. And I feel like every time I watch this piece, that moment changes. Exactly. And how beautiful it is to watch it for the first time. Sorry if I gave it away to some of you who haven't seen it. But I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit on that and how you think about that moment for a viewer of when their brain maybe switches to question what they see.
Yeah. Oh, that's a big question. I mean, I've never actually thought that way, but that's in the film. I agree. I mean, that's present in the work, but at the same time, I've never, I never think of those structures like before in advance that this goes this way. I kind of follow the flow because I believe that whenever, because film starts in your head, and this is so strange that it starts with your imagination, but once you're like in the film set, you're translating your own imagination into physical form, and then you have an actual material that you have to work with. And I believe that the material itself has its own character in a way, so that you have to tame or work with or collaborate with. And I believe that with that film, with All Hands Buried the Dead, was the idea was to to start with this like slow cinema approach, almost like a documentary genre, that like you invite the audience into this like weird stillness that is almost feels boring in a way. And out of this boringness, because I believe in the idea of being bored is very important in art, and especially nowadays when the time moves so like fast, I believe that somehow the work should demand the viewer to like, you know, just stay a bit stay a bit longer with the work. And then it starts to slowly build up in an interesting way, that like the wind starts to approach, and then probably the audience thinks that, oh, that's the trick, you know, that's the thing. And then and it kind of I think the shift never happens. I mean, this like moment of transition from like real to unreal is very slow. It's like almost invisible, I would say. And like for me at least, it's like how I see it, because in the other films that we're gonna speak about later, it's much more stricter, you know. It's like they have much more like a very obvious line when you are taken away into another world. And here is the idea was to build up of this tension that you find yourself immersed in the dreamlike setup in a way. Yeah, this is
So it's really interesting to hear you talk about this. I also feel that there's such a suspension of disbelief when it comes to movie making, and in a work like this, it's funny because I almost felt the opposite from the first film, because in this piece, and the image here is of these fireworks that are happening in this kind of forest landscape, but there are these taxidermized animals that you were speaking about earlier that are within it, that are kind of situated in the forest. Of course, animals are very afraid of fireworks, but these are not animals, as you mentioned before. But in this piece, there's also these like the opposite happens, where you're looking at a taxidermized animal and its fur is moving so softly and its eyes are staring so intently at the viewer that you almost want it to be real. There's this way that it's like you're almost reversing the idea of something that's unreal becoming real.
That's an interesting take. Yeah, I mean, that's there. Yeah, obviously, but I don't know. It's like also here it was more. Yeah, that's true, because at some point you see that the whole film is structured in this conditional like non-space, but at the same time you could feel that. I mean, I could feel that like the lighting is like imitation, the animals are imitation, so everything seems to be fake. Even the wind is fake, you know. So it's everything is produced, and I like this. I don't know, the feeling of how the empathy. I mean, how you kind of get emotional connection to something that is completely fabricated in a way. And I think this need of like them being animated comes from this empathy that is somehow intentionally like positioned in the work, that everything brings you there to this emotional spectrum that you want them to activate. But at the same time, the magic of the film and filmmaking is that you create you make audience believe in things that are completely fabricated, you know. And yeah, I think and also the idea of the fireworks, it was important for me to kind of think about fireworks not as an aspect of the celebration, but that it has much more darker vibes, and it could be also for the people who experienced war, civil war. For them, this always feels like very um, traumatizing in a way. So I would like, the idea was to bring the tension of the light, because obviously you have this beautiful colors like blue, green, da, da. And then but this could be also this light. The idea of the light has um, a very dark weight in it for me. So that was kind of an important aspect, to play with the light, that how the light activates and gives life, like animating those like um, animals as we call them, but I'm not sure if they're if they're animals as mentioned before. Yeah.
And just to move on for the sake of time, the last film, it does feel very different than the ones before. First, it's the first one that you've made that incorporates a human in it. It's also it has more chapters, if you will, or like, various different parts of it that build upon one another. And yeah, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about like what your experience was like making this film, how it differed from the other films, and maybe what you were thinking about in terms of the if you will, like rather than one painting, this feels like it's a series.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very important question to me, because it's most recent film, and I had like so many feelings and thoughts about it. And yeah, that's so true that this film contains more narrative than the other ones, and it's more structured, because my idea was to, like with the like other two films, to work in kind of in these liminal spaces that are always positioned, or the setup would take place to the woods or forest or whatever, like this place that cannot be recognizable. And here I was thinking to reverse a bit, like to build up the narrative opposite to the other two films. And whenever you enter to the domestic space, like interiority, you enter to, I would say, it becomes more cinematic, and it requires much more accuracy to somehow find the right characters or structure to make it work in a way. And yeah, I was trying to think in that way, to also start in a very cinematic way, and then have this like a very strict like line that now we've moved to the video art, now we've moved to this I don't know, the state of whatever can happen. But this is was the challenging to make it convincing. I'm not sure if I've succeeded, but that was my intention. And also, you have the mouse, and it's like more symbolic, because mouse was mouse used to be the remnant that lives in the interior, but it's never tamed. So it's like the symbol of something living in the domestic environment that contains both wilderness and being part of the interiority in a way. So this like small details led me to structure, and also the honey part, that the spoon is slowly coming down from the jar, and then like things start to levitate, because it was connected. You just cannot make things float in the air, you need some logic. And every time I really find to construct the right logic. I would say, like, for me, the most important part is not the storytelling, but rather to have a specific logic in the film, even though it's like absurd, even though if does not make any sense to the audience or whoever watches it. For me, it has to contain some of the logic. And here, I think I have achieved some of the logic, like inner logic that the film has.
It's so funny. I never thought about that before. Like the spoon that's floating in space is like connected to the levitating objects. Is connected. One of the things.
Gravity, like the idea of the gravity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today.
One of the things that you told me the other day that I thought was so shocking was that that's a real mouse. It looks so animated, and that there's no effects in the work, and everything that you're doing is like
that's true.
Finding a way to make it possible with physical objects, right? There's no CGI or like no way that anything is animated, which is quite surprising.
Which is challenging, because I actually tested the floating part with Midjourney, like the AI assistant or AI gadget, and it animated the film still just in like 5 minutes, and I've been doing this manually for 6 months. So I think we're in the moment that, like, in the future, this kind of works will disappear in a way, because you can do so much digitally. But at the same time, it's so much fun to work with the team, and so much fun to kind of find a way of how to organize the film set to make things work. Because at the same time, even though I use like effects in the film, in my films, it's not the main aspect of the work. It's not that I do some things for, like an effect. So everything has its own role in the film. So and the mouse is real, completely real, non-animated. I've been asked for many times about the mouse, but but maybe in a future film I'm gonna include a CGI. I don't know, because we're like actually in 2 years we don't know how it's gonna change.
Yeah, and I wonder if we'll be able to tell or not. I don't know. Well, I realize we have about 10 minutes left. I have plenty more questions, but I think we should open it up to the audience here. Okay, I see a question right here, another one here. I'm curious. Oh, wait for the mic. Hold on, it's coming.
I'm curious about your influence of Asian cinema, particularly Apichatpong that you mentioned. And we just had Tai Ming Liang screen Stray Dogs in this cinema. Yeah. And I remember seeing Margot screening, which is Apichatpong's film in the galleries. So I'm just curious, the Georgian Asian kind of cinematic lineage. And I guess it's slow cinema, but it's also something a little bit more. This slight surrealism, and I would love to hear you speak more about it. Thank you.
I mean, that's a nice question, interesting one. I'm really inspired by many authors, but I could not say, I could not define like a specific authors, but I believe that my practice is belonging to some branch of family of filmmakers in a way, and Apichatpong could be in that family, but I don't really think that's like, obviously I love Asian cinema, I love American cinema, I love European, I love Africa. It's like I love just I love cinema. So, but I have a pretty big impact, like of the rhythm of how the Asian and also Iranian filmmakers do that a lot. So, I can tell that I just love I love people who are very accurate, and they construct their own language. I'm always fascinated by the authors who bring their visionary language that you could somehow be influenced by, and I'm very open to the influences.
So I want to ask you a little bit more about the liminality, and you were talking about the animation part and seeing this from the perspective of the future. I'm wondering if once liminality, I've seen some people in political science start to use liminality to explain events because people are overwhelmed by what's going on in the world, so they sort of take recourse to liminality. I'm wondering if you see that there's a danger in that moving out of art and into the political realm, where liminality gets kind of naturalized into discourse, and then people start to use it in a way that is very precious, and then in 2 years we're in, like you were saying about the animation, that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So like, is this like the last moment where we can fully have these self-consuming artifacts that are liminal and exquisite? And then what happens once liminality is actually a category that people need to explain things and kind of gets flattened out? I don't know. It's kind of
That's a big one. That's a very, very big one. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I mean, like we could talk about this for like for hours, and it's like very complicated subject. But for me, like liminality, like I agree what you said about liminal, but at the same time, no, I just use for me liminality is the fictional. It's more like structuring a fictional, like a fairy tale atmosphere, when you gain more freedom, that things could, you could easily, not easily, but like you could also somehow like open up this way of looking at the things in a different way. And if you convince the audience, if you convince the, whoever watches your work, that another way of seeing exists, and the liminality becomes a tool. But obviously it could be, but I don't see it as a form of escapism or something like that. I think for me it's more like a space where, like I believe that like we live in the era that imagination takes a like should take a big role in our everyday life, and it's a very pure skill or state that we have, and we have to be very cautious about it. And I think this idea of bringing liminality to the work is tied to the idea of the bringing imagination to the work. So it's not necessarily political, but I feel that dimension exists somewhere at the backdrop. But we could talk about it for hours, but I think this is not a right time.
All right, I think we have time for one more, if anyone has one. Okay.
When I was watching, oh, it's so weird to hear your own voice. When I was watching the films in the other room, there were several moments where it was just really funny. Like when the honey is dropping down, and I don't know, I burst out laughing kind of inappropriately. And also when the bushes were moving, and knowing Georgians, I don't know, like it's very serious, but with the surreal, it just feels a lot like humor, and like in a good way, but also in a surreal way. And I'm just wondering if that was wrong.
No, nothing is wrong.
When I saw that scene in All Hands Bury the Dead with the bushes, I said, please tell me that there were individual people behind each bush that were moving in sync.
I remember that, yeah. No, I mean, nothing is wrong. I mean, I'm happy that it made you laugh, because on the other day when it opened, I was in the room, and I've seen some visitors also smiling, and it made me happy, because I don't know, like I think honey and some like mouse could be also, like there are elements that are like seem to be funny. They seem to be like funny in the way that they seem too absurd or too like not logical in the way that it makes you smile. And I'm very happy that if that layer is present in the work. Yeah, I mean, it was not intentionally, like with the bushes approaching the camera. That was the funny part, and that was intentional. But the honey and I've heard that with a few of my friends that they've been like smiling with the honey part. And I'm always happy that if people see humor in the work, I think that's amazing. Yeah, I'm happy that you said that.
I think that the curtain was exquisite work, and how I interpreted the whole scene with the honey is that unseen wind, and then we have something like very ephemeral about the curtain because it's so light and transparent, and that energy moves to something very substantial, such as a jar of honey.
Yeah,
that's
a good yeah. I to be honest, I'm always very careful of giving my own kind of interpretation of what was meant from my side, because then it would like lock down or make it a bit narrow. So as in my presentation, I also kind of mentioned that I'm open. I always leave a room for the interpretation. So just love your way of, how do you refer to the scene that actually makes amazing sense to me. So that's correct. That's how it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andro.
Thank you, Margot.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.